Have you ever wondered if you really know the person who sleeps next to you every night? I thought I did too. For years I saw a man who looked me in the eye, who held my hand tightly, and who promised me eternal love. We had our routine, our laughter, our little rituals that for me were proof of our complicity. But life sometimes likes to test us in ways no soap opera or movie could imagine. And what I'm going to tell you now might make you look at certain situations with different eyes. Stay with me until the end, because what happened here could very well have happened in the life of someone you know, or even in your own. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when nothing seemed out of place. I was home alone, organizing things, cleaning as usual. There was no reason to suspect anything. The sun was streaming through the windows, the smell of coffee still lingered in the air, and I felt at peace. But suddenly, a simple, almost automatic action changed everything. As I was adjusting the sofa cushions, I felt something hard, as if it were a forgotten object. Curious, I reached into the fabric and pulled it out. It was an envelope, yellowed, with slightly worn edges, as if it had been folded and unfolded several times. At that moment, my heart leaped. I can't explain why, but something inside me already knew that that piece of paper carried more than words. Have you ever had that feeling? That strange mix of curiosity and fear, as if what you were about to discover could change everything? I stood there, holding the envelope, staring at it like it was a bomb about to explode. What you're about to discover next might surprise you, because that's exactly how I felt when I slid my fingers under the flap and opened it, barely breathing. The handwriting was unmistakable, but it wasn't mine. Round, firm letters, and an intimate way of writing that only exists between two people who share more than they should. I began to read, and with each word, my breath grew heavier. They were phrases of love, promises, memories of moments, but none of them were for me. It was as if each line were a sharp knife cutting not only the relationship I thought I had, but also the image I'd built for years. Words like, "I miss you," and "I can't wait to see you again," seemed to echo in my head, and I couldn't understand how it could be hidden there, in the place where we sat every night. At that moment, I realized I wasn't just holding a letter. I was holding a piece of his life that had never been shown to me. A piece he'd kept hidden from my eyes, protected between the cushions of a sofa that, ironically, had witnessed so many of our conversations and laughter. It was more than a betrayal. It was a carefully constructed double life. And you know what struck me most? The silence. The house was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat. I wondered how many times he'd sat there beside me after reading or writing something like that to someone else. How many stories, how many glances, how many words were calculated so I wouldn't notice. It was as if, suddenly, I was living inside a plot full of family secrets, well-kept lies, and a hidden truth about to be revealed. You might be wondering what I did next. I screamed. I cried. I confronted him. But before any reaction came that moment of paralysis, as if the world around me had slowed down, forcing me to face every detail, every letter, every sign that this wasn't the first time he'd broken the trust that existed between us. And this is where the transformation begins. Because before any decision, there's the impact. And that impact is something you never forget. I want you to imagine with me years of marriage, promises, plans for the future, and suddenly, a simple envelope changes the whole story. It wasn't just about him being with another woman. It was about the fact that he managed to live this lie for so long without me realizing it. This made me question not only the relationship, but also my own perception of things. Had I always been too naive? Were the signs there and I just chose not to see them? Or is it that sometimes we only truly discover the truth when it decides to reveal itself? Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what happened after this discovery shook every part of me and took me to places I never imagined. Internal, emotional places, where I had to revisit memories, rethink choices, and face the weight of knowing that the life I was living wasn't exactly what I imagined. I remember sitting there on the couch, still holding the letter in my hand, feeling as if each word weighed heavily on me. It was like holding onto a piece of my life that had been stolen from me without me even knowing it. And it's funny, when we live through a moment like this, It's not just the story that changes, it's the way we look at everything and everyone around us, and that's why I like sharing these experiences here. Because I know that, on the other side, there may be someone going through something similar, feeling lost, or even questioning whether they're overreacting to their feelings. No, you're not. Sometimes, hearing a story like this helps you realize that it's not just you, and that there's a path forward after the impact. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most, or if you've experienced something similar. Your story might help someone else reading this, and at the same time, it shows me that I'm not just talking to myself. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. When you comment, like, and subscribe, it's not just a gesture. It's like saying, I want these stories to continue being told. I craft each video with great care so you feel like you're sitting with me, listening to something intimate, almost like a confidential conversation. And when you subscribe, you give me the chance to keep this exchange alive. So, if you haven't already, subscribe now and like this video. This is how we build a community where every experience, every revelation finds a listening ear and a heart willing to listen. And it was precisely this sense of connection that gave me the strength to carry on with what came next. Because from that moment on, the pieces of my past began to rearrange themselves in a way I could never have imagined. I'm a woman who's seen a lot in this life. I'm not just talking about joys and triumphs, but also about the falls that taught me more than any victory could. Every scar I carry, every silence I've had to swallow, has shaped the way I see the world today. And perhaps that's why this story hit me so hard. Because it wasn't just an isolated episode. It was as if it touched every memory I'd ever held in a corner of my soul. I always believed that truly getting to know someone took time. That familiarity, routine, and intimacy revealed a person's character. But this experience showed me that sometimes even the most attentive eyes can reveal secrets that were right there, right under your nose. And the most painful part isn't just the discovery itself, but the shattering of the trust you believed to be unshakable. It's as if the entire ground you've built, step by step, is crumbling beneath your feet. The hidden truth I found in that letter shook not only my mind, but also my way of relating to the past. I began revisiting moments, dialogues, and laughter that now sounded different, as if every word spoken had a subtext I didn't understand at the time. This reinterpretation of past experiences is cruel, but also revealing. It forces us to reflect on decisions, on how we trust, and on how at times we ignore signs that were there all along. And don't think this is just a story of pain. Quite the opposite. It's also a story of transformation. Because even with the devastating impact of the discovery, something inside me awakened. A kind of strength I didn't know I possessed. I began to look at my journey with new eyes, understanding that each loss is also an invitation to rediscover who we are without what we believed was indispensable. The curious thing is that, after reading that letter, I felt like I was standing before a portal, a passage to a version of myself I hadn't yet known. The initial shock gave way to an almost frightening clarity. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, I had removed the blindfold covering my vision and seen behind the scenes of my own life. And what I saw wasn't pretty, but it was real. And I've always believed that it is in reality, stark and raw, that we find the starting point for any reconstruction. Many people think that cheating is just about the act itself, but it's not. Cheating is also about what it symbolizes, the breaking of the silent pact that exists between two people. It's about all the little truths omitted, the conversations that never happened, the decisions made without your having a say. And when all this comes to light, it's not just the relationship that's questioned, but your own perception of yourself within that story. I remember that in the following days, I began to observe the world with a different focus. Simple things, like the way someone avoids my gaze or quickly changes the subject, took on new meaning. I began to understand that silence often speaks louder than any words. This shift in mindset was painful, but it gave me a kind of emotional autonomy I hadn't had before. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a point in this story where the pain begins to transform into something different. I won't say it was easy, because it wasn't. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, days when I had to feign strength to keep from falling apart in front of others. But there were also moments of lucidity, moments when I realized I was writing a new chapter of my life, even without having planned it. That letter I found on the couch wasn't just a revelation about someone else. It was, above all, a mirror that forced me to face myself head-on, to recognize my own choices, my limits, and most importantly, my ability to start over. I discovered that, no matter how much we want to control the narrative, life always has a parallel script full of twists and turns that don't ask permission to happen. And perhaps that's precisely what makes it all so human. The certainty that, in the end, we all carry our secret stories, our silent battles, and our invisible victories. What we do with these discoveries is what defines the course of our journey. Comment there. That makes sense to me. The house I lived in looked like something out of a magazine commercial, where everything is harmony, warmth, and stability. The linen curtains swayed gently in the morning breeze, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the kitchen while the sound of the news on the television filled the silence. It was the kind of setting that anyone looking in from the outside would think they have a perfect life. Family dinners always started on time, with laughter, light conversation, and repeated stories that, even so, never lost their charm. Sundays, weekends were almost sacred. The long lunch, the dessert that seemed made to cure any sadness, and that feeling that the outside world couldn't reach us. This routine, so predictable and seemingly solid, was the foundation on which I built my trust in the relationship. It was as if every small gesture, every disciplined habit, was silent proof that we were on the right path. And I, so confident in this balance, never questioned whether it was real or just a well-crafted illusion. Today, looking back, I realize how the most trivial details can hide deep secrets. Small pauses, averted glances, quick apologies, all these signs were there, but I was too busy believing in the story I wanted to live. The hidden truth, which would later come to light, was camouflaged precisely by this impeccable appearance. It's curious how the human mind works. When something seems too stable, you feel protected, but you also become more vulnerable to failing to see the cracks that are forming. I thought I knew every corner of that house, every expression on that face, every intonation in his words. But as I learned later, even the most familiar space can harbor secrets you never imagined. The dinners, which I once saw as moments of togetherness, now come back to me with another layer of meaning. Could it be that, as I talked about my day, he was already thinking about another life he kept hidden? Could the smiles we exchanged be a curtain to hide something deeper? It's strange to revisit those moments knowing that, behind the scenes of that life that seemed so stable, decisions were being made that would change everything. This realization didn't come abruptly, but from a breaking point, the day the letter was found. But before that, there was a silent atmosphere I couldn't decipher. Small delays I blamed on traffic, messages responded to with less enthusiasm, a subtle distance that seemed normal. After all, everyone goes through colder phases, but now I know they were pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet know I was putting together. The impact of this revelation lies not only in what it reveals, but in the contrast it creates with what you believed to be true. It's as if the world you knew has suddenly been erased, and in its place another, harsher, darker, more real, has emerged. And it's in this shock that the transformation begins. As the ground disappears from under your feet, you discover you can walk without it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because it's impossible to talk about this perfect life without reflecting on how we often actively participate in the construction of these illusions. Not because we're naive or foolish, but because hope and love have this power to make us close our eyes to what hurts. It's as if we unconsciously choose to protect what we believe to be true, even if, deep down, something inside us whispers that there's more to be discovered. The most challenging part of this journey was facing the fact that it wasn't just about him and his choices, but also about my own decisions along the way. I had every reason to realize something was wrong, but I chose to believe the scenario painted before me. And perhaps this is the hardest part to accept. When the truth arrives, it doesn't just affect the other person. It rips through you from the inside out. And yet there's something liberating about it. When the lie falls, so do the unrealistic expectations you carried. In their place, a blank space emerges. And, as painful as it may be, this space is where we can reshape our lives with firmer, more conscious strokes. This is the part few see when they look at a story like mine. Right there, I'm on this journey too. At first, it seemed like it was all in my head. Small details that, in isolation, didn't mean much, but together began to cast a shadow over the routine I'd thought so solid. It was the gaze that would quickly shift away when I met his gaze, as if he were afraid of blurting out something he didn't want me to see. It was the inexplicable delays, always accompanied by ready-made, convincing excuses, as if they'd already been rehearsed before they were even uttered. And perhaps most disturbing were those whispered conversations on the phone, spoken too softly for me to hear, followed by an abrupt silence as soon as I entered the room. Back then, I struggled to keep my distrust from growing. I told myself that any long-term relationship goes through phases of separation, that work, fatigue, and routine can change the way two people communicate. I tried to maintain a positive mindset because somehow facing the hidden truth I sensed seemed much more painful than accepting a simple explanation. But over time, this effort became a burden. It was like carrying a suitcase full of doubts, trying to pretend they weren't there. And it's curious how the body and mind perceive before reason even accepts. I started to feel butterflies in my stomach when he said he had to go out at the last minute. I started paying more attention to the messages he received and the way he discreetly turned his phone so the screen was out of my eyes. It was subtle, but not innocent. Behind the scenes of the life I thought I knew, something was happening. I just didn't know exactly what. It was at this point that my inner journey began to shift. I could no longer ignore the impact these signs were having on me. My sleep became restless, my thoughts raced, and as much as I wanted to believe what he was saying, there was a constant noise in the back of my mind. Each day, I felt I was closer to a revelation, even though I wasn't sure I was ready to receive it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this phase is often more painful than the discovery itself. It's the moment when you live between two realities, the one you've built and protected for years, and the one that's beginning to form within you, made up of suspicions, small clues, and sensations that can't be easily explained. It's like you're walking on thin ice, trying to make as little noise as possible so as not to break the surface, but feeling that at any moment, something will give way. I remember becoming more observant, paying attention to his behavior patterns, the pauses in his sentences, the quick responses. And along with this attentiveness came a kind of quiet sadness, because when you start looking for signs, deep down you already know you'll find something. It's an unconscious decision, but it completely changes how you perceive each gesture. I also began mentally revisiting past situations, searching for moments that might have already been clues and that, at the time, I'd overlooked. Like the time he canceled an important appointment with the excuse of being sick, but he didn't seem all that down. Or when, on a trip, he was absent for hours, claiming he had something urgent to attend to. Details that had previously been mere details now took on a different weight. And that's when I realized my own transformation was already underway. I was no longer that woman who accepted easy answers and becoming someone who needed clarity, truth, and transparency. This shift in mindset didn't come by choice, but by necessity. It was as if my life was pushing me to see what was right in front of my eyes, even if it meant losing the perfect image I'd defended for so long. And the strangest thing is that, even with all this growing discomfort, I still clung to the hope that I was wrong. Because admitting something was wrong meant questioning the entire relationship, the entire history we'd built. It was a silent struggle between the fear of finding out and the need to know. And deep down, I knew this internal battle wouldn't last long. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I remember that morning exactly. The sun streamed timidly through the living room window, illuminating dust particles dancing in the air as I leaned forward to reach a corner of the sofa. It was an ordinary day, the kind that begins with a calm and predictable routine, but which, hidden behind the scenes, carries the potential to change everything. I was just cleaning unhurriedly when my hand touched something that wasn't part of the foam or fabric, a small, firm lump that shouldn't have been there. I pulled it out slowly, and the moment I saw the folded piece of paper, a chill ran down the back of my neck. It was an old envelope, the paper already beginning to yellow at the edges, and on it was handwriting I recognized immediately, but hadn't seen in a long time. It wasn't just the handwriting, it was the emotional weight it carried, as if every curve and line whispered something buried for years. I held that envelope for a few seconds before opening it. It was as if my body knew that from the moment I read those words, there would be no going back. The strange sensation in my chest grew, a mixture of curiosity and fear, because deep down, I knew this wasn't just a forgotten note. It was something that had been placed there so it wouldn't be found, at least, not anytime soon. My fingertips trembled slightly as I began to unfold the paper. Even before reading, I sensed the care with which it had been written, as if each word had been chosen to carry a precise weight. And it was at that moment that a hidden truth began to insinuate itself, even before I fully understood it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened there wasn't just the discovery of a letter. It was the beginning of a silent, almost imperceptible transformation, but one that began to rewrite my own history. In that instant, all the signs I'd been ignoring took on new meaning. Every evasive look, every excuse, every silence, they all aligned like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known existed until then. As I read the first few lines, I felt the air grow heavier. The words were charged with emotion, but it wasn't my own. It was a voice speaking of love, of encounters, of promises, and they weren't being made to me. My heart was pounding, and even before I reached the end, I already knew. I was facing a revelation that would not only shake my confidence, but also change the way I'd viewed my entire life up until that point. The impact was so profound that I had to sit down. My hands still held the paper, but my mind was already elsewhere, revisiting memories and past situations that suddenly seemed to have a new explanation. It was as if time had bent, and I could see behind the perfect scenario I so defended. And there, sitting in the living room, my heart racing and the open letter in my lap, I realized that this was the boundary between the before and after of my story. I could have sealed the envelope and put it back, pretending nothing had happened. I could have shielded myself from the pain, the confusion, and the questions that would come. But in that moment, something inside me had already shifted. I no longer wanted to live in the comfortable illusion that kept me blind. I wanted answers. I wanted the complete truth, even if it came with heartache. That letter, forgotten on the sofa, was more than a piece of paper. It was a portal to a world of secrets that, until then, had lived hidden in the shadows of my routine. And as my hands ran over each line, I realized that this wasn't just his story. It was mine too. A story I had never chosen to live, but which now became impossible to ignore. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Each word I read seemed to weigh a ton. It was as if those sentences were imbued with a perfume that wasn't mine, a warmth that didn't belong to me. The letter began softly, almost poetically, describing memories of encounters, secret conversations, glances exchanged far from the prying eyes of the world, but none of those moments were with me. They were memories he'd constructed with another woman, as if he had a parallel universe where I simply didn't exist. With each line, the feeling of estrangement grew. It was like watching a movie where the protagonist is the person you love, but the plot has no room for you. The words were charged with passion and intimacy, but there was also a quiet confidence there, as if they both knew exactly what they were doing. And worse, as if they felt no remorse for it. I read and reread passages, trying to find something that would prove I was misinterpreting, that perhaps it was a mix-up, a mistake, anything that would give me some peace of mind. But the further I read, the clearer it became that there was no mistake. What I had here was living proof of a double life, carefully constructed to never come to light. It was an emotional map that showed where his heart truly lay, and it wasn't with me. Promises cut through me like blades. He spoke of a future together, of travel, of shared dreams, and made plans for an after that, for me, would never exist. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, a tightness in my chest that almost prevented me from breathing. Because it wasn't just the physical betrayal. It was the betrayal of time, of energy, of the sweet words that should have been mine and were being given to someone else. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because reading that letter wasn't just a painful moment. It was the trigger for a series of internal revelations. As I read, I began to remember small details that I had previously ignored. Those Friday night absences, the messages he claimed were from work, the lost look in his eyes when I asked him something more direct. All of this took on a new layer of meaning. It was impossible not to wonder how he managed to maintain this facade, how he was able to sit at the table with me, laugh, tell stories, and at the same time, harbor within himself a world I knew nothing about. This realization made me realize that the hidden truth lay not only on the yellowed paper, but also between the lines of our life together. I began to mentally revisit every gesture, every conversation, every silence, and to realize that the story I was living might never have been complete. The strangest thing was that, amidst all that emotional turmoil, there was a part of me that didn't want to close the letter. It was as if I needed to read it to the end, to be absolutely certain, to leave no room for doubt or empty justifications. And so I made it to the last sentence, where he lovingly signed off and added a nickname I'd never heard before. An intimate name, one that belonged only to her. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I felt a mixture of anger and sadness, but also a kind of brutal clarity. I knew in that moment that there was no going back to the before. It was like walking through a door that only opened one way, and I had just walked through it. Comment there. That makes sense to me. I remember the exact sensation of that moment when I folded the letter back, trying to put it back in the same place, as if nothing had happened. Outwardly, my body moved almost automatically, but inside, it was as if a silent earthquake were happening. Every step I took around the house seemed to echo louder than usual, as if even the floor knew I carried a hidden truth that could change everything. And then the dilemma began. Part of me wanted to scream, throw that letter in front of him, and demand immediate explanations. Another part, perhaps more strategic or more frightened, said I should wait, breathe, and try to understand where this story was going. Speaking on impulse might give me quick answers, but perhaps not the whole truth. And at that moment, I needed the whole truth, not manipulated fragments. In the days that followed, tension seeped into my routine like an invisible poison. I found myself observing his every gesture, every pause in his words, every smile that had previously gone unnoticed. When the phone rang, I paid attention to his tone of voice. When he left, I noticed the way he closed the door. Everything seemed to take on new meaning, as if small, once mundane details were now pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to put together. This forced wait also affected my mentality. I was learning, the hard way, to deal with the discomfort of uncertainty. It's not easy to live with a revelation that carries such a shock while simultaneously maintaining the expression of someone who knows nothing. It was a draining psychological game, but one I felt was necessary, because deep down, I knew this journey wasn't just about him. It was also about me, about my ability to face the pain without letting it consume me completely. At night, when the house was quiet, I found myself revisiting every conversation from the past, trying to find clues that would confirm or deny what I'd discovered. It was like watching an old movie with fresh eyes, noticing details that previously seemed irrelevant. And the more I analyzed, the more I realized that this story hadn't begun with that letter. It had only been revealed by it. The backstory to this double life had been there all along, hidden behind rehearsed smiles and perfectly calculated excuses. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because silence in this case wasn't just an absence of words. It became an internal battlefield. At every breakfast, every dinner, I tested my own limits, measuring how long I could endure without speaking. And curiously, in this process, I began to notice nuances of our relationship that had previously escaped me. How he would look away during simple questions, how he would quickly change the subject when something touched too close to the reality he was hiding. This time of waiting was also a period of transformation for me, not in the romantic sense of the word, but in the raw, real sense. It was when I realized that important decisions aren't made only in the moment of confrontation, but also in the silence that precedes it. It was there, in this space between knowing and acting, that I was invisibly rebuilding myself, strengthening a part of myself that had perhaps been dormant for years. Of course, there were moments when anger rose like an unexpected tide, and I wanted to put an end to the act once and for all. But something told me that to deal with a revelation of this magnitude, I needed more than courage. I needed strategy. And that included observing, analyzing, and waiting until I was certain my next words would be not just an outburst, but a direct blow to the lie he'd constructed. As I waited, I realized that the secret I carried wasn't just making me more suspicious of him. it was also making me more self-aware. It was as if, by seeing his flaws so clearly, I was forced to see my own choices, the moments I'd closed my eyes to hide, the times I'd settled for less than I deserved. And this realization, painful as it was, had the power to completely redefine what I wanted for my life from then on. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. It's curious how, right up until the moment the truth dawns on you, there's still an invisible thread holding the illusion together. But when that thread breaks, it's not just the relationship that falls to the ground. It's as if an entire part of your history collapses with it. I remember exactly the moment I realized there was no going back. It wasn't just about a hidden letter or secret meetings with another woman. It was about everything it represented. The trust, which seemed so solid, proved as fragile as thin glass. And the worst part is, when it shattered, the shards didn't just scatter around him. They embedded themselves in me. Suddenly, everything I thought I knew about us began to dissolve. The memories that had once comforted me took on a strange, almost bitter tinge. That special dinner that had seemed so sincere now seemed like a disguise to ease his own guilt. The words he spoke so tenderly sounded like rehearsed phrases, part of a calculated script, and I wondered how many of these scenes were real and how many were just smokescreens. But the most painful hidden truth wasn't just what he did, it was what it awakened within me. Because when trust is shattered, you don't just distrust the other person, you begin to distrust yourself, your choices, your perception, your ability to read reality. And that's a deep wound, one that doesn't heal with time alone. It takes courage to face that perhaps you ignored obvious signs, perhaps you settled for a happily ever after that was already compromised long before the revelation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the impact of betrayal isn't limited to the moment of discovery. It infiltrates your mindset, changes how you interpret the world, and even how you see yourself. It's as if the ground has cracked beneath your feet, and each step from then on is taken with greater caution and distrust. At the same time, this rupture can be the starting point for an unexpected transformation. I realized that to rebuild my story, I needed to first understand that the narrative I'd carried up until that point wasn't entirely mine. Part of it had been shaped by his lies, by the behind-the-scenes details he'd kept hidden. And to regain control, I would have to rewrite everything, not to erase the past, but to give it a different meaning. In the days that followed, I began to look at myself differently. Instead of simply asking myself, why did he do this? I began to ask, what am I going to do with this? And this simple shift in perspective opened the door to decisions that previously seemed impossible. Decisions about what I wanted to keep, what I needed to let go of, and what I needed to rebuild from scratch. It wasn't a quick or clean process. It was painful, confusing, and full of ups and downs. But little by little, I began to understand that my identity didn't need to be tied to the distorted image he'd led me to believe. I've also discovered that, even in the darkest moments, there's a quiet force that pushes us forward. It's that inner voice that tells us we weren't born to live in fear, that we don't deserve to be burdened by the weight of distrust. And while this voice may sometimes sound weak, it's persistent enough to remind us that there are still paths to follow, even when the map we once had has been torn apart. When I think about shattering trust, I see that it's not just about losing something precious. It's also about gaining clarity. It's as if, by breaking, that false structure finally allows light to enter, revealing what was always there, but which I didn't want or couldn't see. And this clarity, however painful, is what gives us the chance to rebuild on true foundations. Right there. This makes sense to me. The hardest thing to accept was realizing that the letter wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much bigger and more painful. At first, I still wanted to believe it had been a slip-up, an isolated error, but something inside me, perhaps the intuition we so often ignore, told me there was more to it. So, little by little, I began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. Small lapses in the stories he told, subtle changes in his tone of voice, deleted messages from his phone, and even dates that suddenly didn't match what he claimed to have done. Each clue seemed to lead to another, and my image of him began to shatter even further. I discovered hidden conversations, meetings in places he claimed he'd never been, promises made to other people with the same intensity with which he swore his love to me. It was like watching a puzzle piece unfold, revealing a scene completely different from what I'd imagined. And it was at that moment that I realized the letter I'd found on the couch was just the tip of the iceberg. This new truth didn't come suddenly, like a single shock. It revealed itself slowly, like a spreading poison. And each new discovery forced me to grapple with a mixture of anger and sadness, but also with a strange clarity. I was no longer just facing betrayal. I was facing a carefully constructed double life, fueled by lies repeated so often they almost felt real. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding the weight of secrets isn't just about identifying the lie, but about understanding the impact it has on our personal journey. Each secret I uncovered not only distanced me from it, but also brought me closer to myself, to my strength, my ability to see beyond appearances, and my resolve to accept no less than I deserve. That's when I realized something important. Secrets don't survive alone. They require silence, complicity, and often our own unconscious choice not to ask questions. For a long time, I gave those lies room to grow, because it was more comfortable to believe the pretty version than to face the ugly truth. This realization was harsh, but also liberating. I couldn't change what he did, but I could decide what I would do with it from then on. The nights grew long, and I mentally relived every conversation, every moment I might have missed. It's curious how, when the truth begins to emerge, the past gains new layers. Previously banal situations take on a different meaning. A late-night phone call, a strange smell on someone's clothes, an unexplained nervous expression. Everything seemed part of a plot that suddenly I began to understand. And the more I discovered, the more I felt I was no longer just a spectator in my own story. I was becoming the protagonist, taking it upon myself to investigate, to seek the full truth, not because I wanted to wallow in pain, but because I needed to reclaim something he had tried to steal, my clarity, my peace of mind. This phase taught me that secrets carry an invisible but real weight. They change the atmosphere of the house, affect how we look at those around us, and even how we see our own reflection in the mirror. And, contrary to what one might imagine, the worst part isn't finding out. The worst part is feeling like you've lived without knowing for so long. Looking back today, I see that this was one of the hardest lessons, but also one of the most transformative. I learned that, however painful, the truth always offers us the chance to start over. Maybe not in the way we dreamed, maybe not with the same people by our side, but with a clear conscience and the strength of someone who survived an emotional shipwreck and managed to resurface. Right there, I'm on this journey too. Moving on wasn't an overnight decision, nor was it a decision made without tears or sleepless nights. It was a slow process, almost like rebuilding a house that had collapsed, brick by brick, knowing that some pieces would never be the same again. At first, my mind insisted on revisiting every detail, as if rehashing the past could give me a sense of control. But I soon realized that this only kept me trapped, fueling a pain I no longer wanted to carry. The transformation began when I realized it wasn't just about ending a relationship, but about redesigning my life. It wasn't about him, it was about me. About who I wanted to be from then on, and what kind of story I wanted to continue writing. This clarity didn't come like a bolt of lightning, but like a slow dawn, where light gradually fills each space. I began to realize that, as difficult as it was, letting go of the past was an act of self-love. It was at this point that my mindset shifted. Instead of seeking answers in his actions, I began asking myself questions. What did I really want? What was I willing to accept? And most importantly, what would I never allow again? These answers helped me chart a firmer path, even with the inevitable stumbles of someone learning to walk alone again. And don't think that moving on means erasing the pain. It was still there, like a scar that insisted on burning on cold days. But instead of fighting it, I learned to look at that mark as a reminder that I survived, and that, despite everything, I still had the strength within me to create something new. That was the turning point, understanding that what happened to me wouldn't define my future unless I let it. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because when we talk about letting go of the past, many people imagine that it's enough to simply distance themselves, move house, or cut off contact. But true liberation happens within. It's when you can look in the mirror and no longer see just the person who suffered, but also the person who grew, who learned, who gained the courage to make difficult decisions. It took courage to tear down an entire life and start over. But, curiously, I realized there was beauty in this process. Each small achievement, from having coffee alone in a new place to rearranging the house to my liking, was like adding a new piece to my puzzle. Little by little, I began to feel that life, though different, could be good again. I also discovered that overcoming grief isn't linear. There were days when it felt like I was taking 1,000 steps forward, and others when a simple scent or song would take me back to the beginning of the pain. And that's okay. I've learned to respect these ups and downs as part of the journey. No one emerges unscathed from a breakup like this, but no one needs to be stuck in it forever either. Ultimately, moving forward is about making peace with what can't be changed and embracing what can still be built. It's accepting that some answers will never come, but that doesn't stop you from creating new questions, new experiences, new dreams. Today, I know my story didn't end on that couch, nor in that letter. It simply changed course, and, in my case, to a path where I have more voice, more choices, and more self-love. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Sometimes the pain of discovering the truth is so intense, it feels like the ground is falling away beneath our feet. It's a void difficult to explain, as if everything you believed to be real was merely a staged scene, a carefully constructed performance to hide the hidden truth. At first, this revelation feels like a punishment. Your mind insists on returning to that moment, reliving every detail, every word, every gesture that now carries a completely different meaning. It's like watching a movie you've seen 1,000 times, but suddenly realizing there was a parallel story you'd never noticed. But over time, I realized something that changed the way I see it all. Perhaps this pain was actually the first step toward my freedom. It's strange to think this way when we still have open wounds, but the truth has this power to cleanse, even if it initially stings like an open cut. Because when the illusion falls, what remains is reality, and as harsh as it may be, at least it's true. This clarity made me reflect on trust, not just the trust we place in others, but the trust we place in ourselves. For a long time, I ignored the signs, letting the fear of loss prevent me from seeing what was right in front of me. And that's not weakness. It's human. But there comes a time when you have to ask yourself, how much is it worth holding on to something that suffocates your essence? Self-love, for me, didn't begin with a nice speech or the idea of putting yourself first. It began in silence, when I looked at myself and realized I deserved more than crumbs of attention and empty promises. That's when courage came into play. Courage isn't the absence of fear, quite the opposite. Courage is feeling fear, but still making decisions that bring us closer to the life we deserve. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a transformation that happens within us when we choose the truth, even if it hurts. It's as if each broken piece of our history can be collected and reorganized differently, forming a new design more aligned with who we are now. This process isn't quick or linear. There are relapses, there are days of doubt, there are moments when you wonder if it wouldn't have been easier to continue believing the lie. But it's precisely in these moments that we realize how far we've come. Ultimately, true freedom isn't being free from pain, but being able to face it without it dictating the course of your life. It's understanding that our story doesn't end at the moment of betrayal, nor when the secret is revealed. It continues, and continues with greater strength, greater awareness, and a greater capacity to make choices that reflect who we truly are. Today, looking back, I see that that hidden letter, that moment when the illusion shattered, was not the end, but the beginning of a new journey. A journey where each step is more conscious, where my voice is firmer, and where my life is no longer in someone else's hands. And perhaps this is the greatest gift the truth has given me, the chance to rewrite my own story. If you've ever discovered something that completely changed the way you saw someone, share your story in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone. If you've stuck with me this far, I think you've already realized that this space is more than stories. It's a place for us to reflect, share experiences, and in some way, grow stronger together. So, if this conversation resonated with you, subscribe to the channel to continue watching content like this, because each video is designed to truly touch you and, who knows, help transform some aspect of your life. Oh, and I want to know who made it to the end with me. Write in the comments, I'm with you until the end. I'd love to see who was part of this exchange until the last word. If you felt this story touched you, leave a like too. It's a simple way to show me that it's worth continuing to bring you this type of content. And look, there's a video here on the side that really complements what we talked about today. Click and continue with me there, because the conversation is far from over.